Hey there, Rappies. Rapper9198 here, and welcome to another edition of Ryan's Day Reading. Today I'll be reading chapter 15 of Make a Move, Moving Through Change. So again, a little recap from the previous chapter. Stephanie Williams O'Brien was really talking about what to do when there may be disruptions, because as the title is, Discernment Through Disruption. It's really about what experiments should you try, and just really being able to what to do with when something or when a disruption happens to come up, and that also disruptions can be a good thing as well. And so now we go to chapter 15, Moving Through Change. And I think it looks like the question that will be answered and discussed in this chapter is, how does experimenting help me cope with the reality of constant change? All right, so here we go. I was sitting with some friends at a Vietnamese restaurant at the end of the block where I used to live. I had only moved a mile away, but something felt strangely sad about going back into that restaurant for the first time after having moved. If you look up the etymology of the word nostalgic, you will see it is derived from the Greek word nostos, which means return home, and algos, or algos, which means pain. So I was experiencing nostalgia, pain, as I returned to what was once my home. For 6 years, I had lived on this block, and during that time, I had 17 different roommates. Wow. It was a season in my life that I absolutely loved. I had the chance to encourage and mentor the younger women living with me, and in turn, I was offered deep friendships from each of them. We had been so intentional about getting to know and love our neighbors, doing our best to follow Jesus' greatest commandments. We threw some amazing block parties, witnessed multiple marriage proposals, and had some heartbreaking experiences as well. It was a time that I will treasure forever. When we moved, each of us was moving on to great things. I was flipping a new house, dating the guy who became my husband, and besides, I wasn't going too far away. All of this stifled the impact of this huge change I was experiencing. Going back to that Vietnamese restaurant created a pan, P-A-N-G, of home pain, because I had experienced such significant change in just a few years. I was now married. Those 17 women were literally living all around the world. Babies had been born, and so much more. Mostly good things, but somehow it still hurt. I opened my fortune cookie, which always made me feel a little snarky ever since I heard a public radio show on the dude in New York City who writes the little fortunes as his job. I looked down at the fortune and read it out loud. And yeah, this is what it said. When you're finished changing, you're finished. Oh wow, that guy in New York City wasn't a fortune teller. He was a mind reader. Now it was just a cookie. But it did shift my perspective from nostalgia to gratitude. Everyone handles change differently, but it is a challenge for all of us in some respect. But if the fortune cookie is right, which they always are, then how can we embrace the way that experimenting can help us move through the change that life brings? All right, this next part is the transition train. Yeah. Heraclitus, I think. I was like trying to think of how to pronounce it. So Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher, is given credit for the saying, "Change is the only constant in life." Quote, yeah, if you are what I like to call a change optimist, then perhaps this phrase fills you with anticipation rather than dread. But most people are not change optimists or even change realists. They are change pessimists. Time and time again, when people are given the option to keep what they have or change to something better, they will choose to avoid the change. Think of all those who resist the chance to update their phone or computer because they don't want the updates to change how things work. The very nature of an update is that it's better. That's the up part. It seems like most people are genuinely afraid of change, but I want to suggest that they don't fear change. They fear loss. And change always means something is lost. We have a deep, visceral reaction to loss, even when what we are losing wasn't that great in the first place. But it was familiar, and familiarity brings consistency and comfort to our lives. Writer Anatole France wrote in one of his novels, "All changes, even the most longed for, have their melancholy, for what we leave behind us is a part of ourselves." So how can we move through change? A good first step is to accept that change is constant. I have often thought of change and transition as a train. Since I live near several train lines, I can almost always hear the noises from the train yard. Change is as constant in our lives as the trains rolling through my neighborhood. The transition train sometimes moves slowly, and other times you can feel it pick up speed. At times, the train moves so fast you need to hold on for dear life, and other times it rolls slowly enough that you feel every ounce of grief as you watch landscapes slowly fade into the distance. I think of those whose loved ones are in hospice, often for longer than expected. The transition train rolls slowly, and part of you might wish it would come to a stop so that you could have more time or go back to what used to be. Another part of you might wish the train would speed up so that you could get past the gut-wrenching pain of losing someone so slowly. Other times, the train can feel exciting. The pace is nice, and you are enjoying the scenery along the way. It's almost like a sensory overload experience. It's not until the train slows down a bit that you realize that even a season of positive transitions can be tiring. If we accept that change is constant, then we are less likely to use times of transition as an excuse for why we aren't developing healthy rhythms in life. We won't hear ourselves saying things like, "There has just been so much transition. I haven't gotten started on that project." Yeah, quote there. Thinking that a season of change will come to a complete stop is one of the most common reasons I've heard people use for why they didn't step into something they were passionate about. The next step is to help us move through change well is to intentionally stop resisting it. We all resist change in different ways. Start to pay attention to your own patterns and notice signs of your resistance to change. It doesn't mean that you must always pursue the next or new thing. It's really more about how those external ways you resist change can help you see where you are internally resisting change. Resisting is like holding tight and clamping down on something you don't want to let go of. When you stop resisting, you can release whatever you are holding on to. That is the process of grieving a loss. You slowly release your grip on what or who is gone. If we become open-handed as we grieve, then we have our hands open to receive. I have found it helps to actually put a hand out in front of you and make a fist that represents what you are holding on to. Then release the grip slowly, finger by finger, asking God to help you grieve and let go. You will then have an open hand ready to receive what God has for you. That's a good little practice to remember when you feel yourself resisting the grief that comes with change. In order to receive what God has for me, I need to let go and grieve. And that's in quote right there. Right, and then this next part is change your mindset. Thinking of change as a transition train has its limitations as an analogy. Another helpful picture is the idea of a sea of change. While the ocean is massive and represents the unknown, we also know much about it. We know that it is wet. We know that it is salty. The ocean tide will rise and fall like clockwork. And while waves can come in slowly or quickly and range from large to small, they are predictable in many ways as well. Getting good at change is easier when we realize how much is consistent, even though change is constant. Being in the sea of change means we can begin to learn to ride the waves. I am landlocked in Minnesota, but whenever I have the opportunity to travel to the coast, I make a point to take in the sea as much as possible. I have never tried to surf, but I have watched some people try to learn on recent trips to the ocean. It's not pretty at first. They typically crash into the waves and often wind up underwater. But these folks can swim, so they navigate back to shore, get up, and try again. Soon they learn to ride the rhythm of the waves, and then they are ready to take on the bigger and stronger waves as they come. We can learn in this same way when it comes to change. We can learn to balance better as we practice riding the smaller waves first. That when we are faced with smaller transitions in life, it can be a good time to reflect on how we process change and what happens in our minds and hearts as we move through the transition. If we can be intentional about growing when we face smaller life changes, it will build our capacity for the larger shifts we will inevitably experience in life. As we continue on our journey, we begin to expect and anticipate some waves to be larger than others, and learn how to join the flow of change as it comes in different seasons of our lives. In many ways, our society is changing faster than it ever has. That means loss is happening at a faster rate as well. The good news is that our capacity to handle change well isn't static. We can grow in our ability to manage the transitions in our lives. We must also learn how to support each other more and more as we experience change at a record-breaking pace. It's much more fun to ride the waves of change together than out on our own. It's also a lot safer to have friends with you when you are surfing. For instance, when it comes to our emotional safety, We need our support system to find wholeness in the midst of the waves. Experimenting is such a helpful concept when it comes to managing change in our lives. In many ways, it slows down the change process, since deciding to experiment is not the same as making a final decision. Often when we approach change, all we can see is the huge wave coming for us, and then we have no concept of how to safely navigate what is coming at us. Like many things in life, if we stop and think of the steps we want to take to navigate the change, then we will be more likely not to get pummeled and knocked off our feet. As difficult as it may feel when the waves of change are looming, we must try to slow down our minds and hearts and think through the experiments we can design. The experiment process creates space for listening to God and paying attention to what God may be inviting us into in the midst of any given change in life. If change is constant, then so is the opportunity to experiment and, in so doing, embrace the experience God may have in mind for you throughout the change process. All right, well, that concludes chapter 15. So again, we're down to 2 more chapters now. Yeah, and these last 2 chapters are pretty short, so but I'll do those, and I'll make those 2 separate videos as well. But again, I just love the messages here in this book, and I'm glad I was able to do this book, and of course the books by Patrick and Justin as well, before I decided to stop with the Ryan's Day reading videos. But again, hope you guys have appreciated all of it, and hope this does give you guys some helpful tips. And again, this is a book I highly recommend. If you can find it on Amazon, or you can look it up, I recommend that you get it, because it could definitely have helpful tips to help you if you're in that kind of situation where you have to make a decision or having to deal with change. All right, well, thank you, Rappies, very much. Again, I greatly appreciate it. I love you all to death. And until next time, I'll see you later, and God bless.